Frog and Rat. A presentation by Katy Flores, Navarro, Rafaelle Henry, and Richard Seto.
Comparative anatomy refers to the study of similar and different body structures of species of animals to get a better understanding of how the adaptive changes they have undergone in evolution. Within this lab, we dissected a frog and rat to examine the organs within each animal in order to see how they are similar and different internally. We observed and recorded the similarities and differences between them. We completed additional research to better understand both species' habitats and role in the ecosystem. Further, we predict how the two species evolved from a common ancestor and where they diverged from each other. Here is the grass frog's background. So the taxonomic names for it include kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Amphibian, order Salientia, family Hydaela, genus chorus frog, and then the species is Ocularis. And the ecological habitat that these frogs live in include abiotic factors, which are non-living, such as that they are adapted to cool and low temperatures and live in rather damp and humid habitats, such as like wet meadows, and then they prefer nights and rainy weathers, like for their skin. And symbiotic factors for them is that they tend to eat mostly insects, and then they live near water and insects in order to survive easier. Some mating patterns and behaviors among these frogs include that they're more active in the night due to their skin conditions and humid weather, and then it also is more often in the spring due to those such conditions. The way they mate is through the position of amplexus, where they line up their cochlea in order to release sperm and egg, and this is also when the female eggs are fertilized, and then eggs are laid in water. And then these animals fit into their food chain / web of the ecosystems. They are secondary consumers. They are herbivores at childhood or when they're tadpoles because they consume algae and decaying matter, but when they mature into adulthood is when they start consuming insects and small vertebrae. Their predators include larger mammals, birds, and cats, and they're also considered a generalist species, meaning they can live in a wide range of settings and have a wide range of small prey to eat. Next up, we have the anatomy of the frog, where I'm going to go through their different organ systems and explain the different organs within each one and what they do. So first up, we have the frog's digestive system, which includes the mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and cochlea. So the mouth, just like ours, just ingests their food. Their esophagus connects their mouths to their stomachs, which transports the food that they ingest. Their stomach stores such food and mixes it with enzymes to begin the process of digestion. Their small intestine basically absorbs the essential nutrients from their food, which they need to survive. Their large intestine stores undigested food. The liver, which is an important one, produces the liquid and plasma proteins that break down their food. Their gallbladder just stores bile. Their pancreas, also important, produces enzymes that are delivered to the small intestine, which absorbs the essential nutrients. And then their cochlea removes waste and allows eggs and sperm to pass through, which is, again, an important thing that they need. Next up, we have their reproductive system and excretory system, which includes their kidneys, urinary bladder, the male reproductive organs, which I'll go more into in a second, and their female reproductive organs. So first up, their kidneys, kind of like ours, secrete surplus water and filter blood. Their urinary bladder stores urine until they excrete it. And then male reproductive organs in the frog include the testes, vas deferens, and cochlea. So their testes, basically like any other animal, is what produces the male gametes in this, which is sperm. The vas deferens are their urogenital duct, and then the cochlea, just as I said, removes waste and allows eggs and sperm to pass through in their reproductive systems. Next up, I have their female reproductive organs, which includes ovaries, the cochlea again, and oviducts. So ovaries produce the female gametes, eggs, cochlea, same thing, removes waste and allows eggs / sperm to pass through when they are reproducing. And oviducts, which is the tube that carries the eggs from the ovaries to the cochlea in time of reproduction. Next up, we have their circulatory system, and they have a closed circulatory system, meaning that their Blood is enclosed in blood vessels, which are like capillaries, veins, and arteries. Something different about them is that they have a 3-chamber heart with 2 atria and 1 ventricle. And then they also receive oxygenated blood from the lungs, which is distributed through the body, and deoxygenated blood from the veins. Next, we have their respiratory system. So frogs take in air through their nasal cavity and it travels through their lungs, allowing them to breathe. However, they also have a unique skin that is thin and moist, which allows gases to easily pass through when they are underwater. Therefore, frogs are able to breathe on land through their lungs and underwater through their skin, which is something very unique about them, which most other animals can't do. Their nervous system, just like any other animal's nervous system, they have their brain, spinal cord, cranial nerves, spinal nerves, reflective reactions, which work basically the same as ours. And then their locomotion. So frogs move by leaping as their hind limbs straighten rapidly from a crouching position and propel the frog through the air, allowing them to leap from place to place. And yeah, that's the anatomy of the frog. Now for the rat background. So the rat's taxonomic names include kingdom Animalia as the frog, phylum Chordata also as the frog. The class, however, is where it starts to differentiate from the frog, as rats are under the Mammalia class. Their order is the Rodentia, their family is Muridae, their genus is Rattus, and then their species is Norvengeticus. So for a rat's ecological habitat, their abiotic factors include a mild temperature ranging from anywhere around from 64 degrees Fahrenheit to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. They also like to live in damp environments, depending on where they are, but a main factor for them is a main abiotic factor for them is where shelter is available, as it helps with their survival. And then some biotic factors is basically rats will thrive where any type of food is available, as they consume many different types of food types. They're not picky. The rat's mating patterns and behaviors include that female rats can mate with a wide variety of different males in just one mating season. And also female rats will choose a male partner with an odor that has a sense of maturity, oddly enough, and that female rats exhibit receptive and proceptive behaviors during mating. And then how rats fit into their food chain / web of their ecosystem. Like frogs, they are also secondary consumers, but rats are also common prey for many predators such as hawks, foxes, bobcats, etc. They are omnivores, as said earlier, so they will eat plants and fruits along with meats that they come across. So basically anything that they see, they will basically eat it as long as they're able to. And then also, like frogs, they are generalist species, meaning they're able to thrive in a broad range of environments and will eat just about anything since they are not picky in that sense. Now we have the anatomy of the rat. On this slide, I'm going to cover the circulatory system, nervous system, their locomotion, and digestive system. So for a rat's circulatory system, they also have a closed circulatory system, meaning that their blood is enclosed within the blood vessels, veins, capillaries, and arteries. But rats have a 4-chambered heart with 2 atriums, one on the left, one on the right, and 2 ventricles, also one on the left and one on the right. And they also receive oxygenated blood from their lungs, which is distributed throughout the body, and deoxygenated blood from the veins. Their nervous system also includes a brain, spinal cord, cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and reflective reactions, and basically work like any other animals, like ours, like the frogs, etc. And so a rat's locomotion. So rats have 4 limbs more suited for walking, running, scurrying around wherever they are. They have a tail for balance, and if they wanted to, rats are capable of standing upright on the back 2 of their legs. So next we have the rat's digestive system. So rats ingest their food in their mouths, where they chew it and cover it in saliva, getting it ready for the digestion process. Their esophagus connects their mouths to their stomachs, which transports their food. And then once the food reaches their stomach, it stores the food and gets it broken down. The broken down food then enters the small intestine, where it absorbs essential nutrients for the rat to function. and after passing through there, it goes into their large intestine, which absorbs water from the remaining indigestible food and also pass useless waste material from the body. The rat's liver produces bile, proteins for blood, cholesterol, and special proteins to help carry fats, and their pancreas plays an important role in digestion and blood sugar regulation. Here's the second slide for the anatomy of the rat, and on this one I will be going over their reproductive system and excretory system and their respiratory system. So for their reproductive system and excretory system, the male reproductive organs of the rat include the testes, which produce male gametes and sperm, their epididymitis, which collects and stores the sperm, and then their vas deferens, which moves sperm from the epididymitis to the urethra. Their prostate secretes prostatic fluid and protects all the organs. Their penis excretes urine and sperm through the urethra and out of their bodies, and then also their scrotum protects all the reproductive organs. The female reproductive organs of the rat include the ovaries, which produce female gametes or eggs. The fallopian tubes collect the mature ovulum from the ovaries and provide passage to the uterus, and then their uterus receives the eggs and supports the growing embryo's development. Their cervix protects the uterus, and then their vagina is the birth canal and where sperm enters during mating. So much like our reproductive systems is how the rats function, because they are also mammals and will go through the same process and have the same organs within them. And in their excretory system, the rats have kidneys, which filter waste products from blood and produce and excrete urine, release hormones, and maintain the water and electrolyte balance of fluids within their bodies. The urethra transports urine in the kidneys to the urinary bladder for storage, and then the urinary bladder stores urine until ultimate excretion. And then the rat's respiratory system. So rats are nasal breathers, meaning they take in air through their nasal cavity, which filters, humidifies, and warms the air inhaled, preparing it for gas exchange. The air then travels down the pharynx, where it gets directed into their lungs. They breathe by the contraction of their diaphragm and external intercostal muscles. Their chest then expands, their lungs get stretched and expand with air, and distension of alveoli occurs, which is ultimately where gas exchange occurs, which then allows for their blood to become oxygenated and go through their circulatory systems. So again, much like ours, the rats have a very similar respiratory system. And yeah.
Comparing the respiratory anatomy between frogs and rats, there are a lot of similarities. They each have a mouth, a nasal cavity, an esophagus, a trachea, and they both have lungs. Lungs function as a means of oxygenating blood for the both of them, but there are a few subtle differences. For example, the way that they draw oxygen into their lungs in the first place. A frog will take air into its mouth, and then it'll compress that air, forcing it back into its lungs. Whereas a rat, and also most mammals, have a diaphragm, and the diaphragm rests just under the lungs, and it controls the pressure within the lungs, and that's how a mammal draws air into the lungs and oxygenates its blood. Also, a frog can utilize cutaneous respiration, which essentially means that their skin functions as a gas exchange surface. So while rats exclusively do lung breathing, frogs can also breathe through their skin.
Comparing the digestive system anatomy between frogs and rats. Frogs and rats have very different digestive systems due to their diets and lifestyles. Both of them have tongues in their mouths, but while the rat has a tongue not too dissimilar to humans and other mammals, a frog's tongue is bilobed and can extend to 130% of its original length for capturing food. They both have salivary glands, an esophagus, as well as a stomach, a small intestine, a large intestine, a liver, and a pancreas. But unlike a frog, the rat doesn't have a gallbladder. This is because they eat plant matter, so they don't require as much bile to break down their food. Rats, on the other hand, do have a cecum that connects their small intestine to their large intestine. The job of a sucum is to temporarily store food while the bacteria that reside there break down cellulose. Frogs and rats expel their waste in very different manners. The rat has an anus, but at the end of the frog's digestive tract is what is called the cloaca. This is the only opening at the end of the digestive, urinary, and reproductive tract for many invertebrates, not including mammals. Comparing the anatomy of the reproductive and excretory systems between frogs and rats. The excretory system between frogs and rats is only different in the way that waste is actually expelled from the body. They both have kidneys as well as a urinary bladder, but unlike a frog, which only has one opening to remove waste from, its cloaca, a rat has two, a urethra for removing urine and an anus for removing feces. On the other hand, the reproductive systems are very different. While they both have organs like testes, ovaries, and a uterus, that is the end of their similarities. In a female rat, they have fallopian tubes to hold their eggs, as well as a cervix and a vagina to push their pups. A male rat has a penis, a prostate, and a scrotum. The frog uses its cloaca for more than just waste removal. It also is how female frogs release their eggs, and then the male frog will release their sperm over the eggs from their own cloaca.
In comparing the circulatory anatomy between a frog and a rat, you'll notice a lot of similarities. For example, each organism has a heart, and the heart serves the same function. It serves as a pump, and it pumps deoxygenated blood into lung capillaries, and then pumps out oxygenated blood into systemic capillaries, and the loop continues. However, there are a few differences between a frog and a rat circulatory system. For example, a frog has an amphibian circulatory system, and an amphibian's heart is triple chambered. There is no separation of the ventricle. If you'll recall, in mammals' circulatory system, there's a left and a right ventricle, but in amphibian, there is not one. So this means that there's a mixing of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood, which might seem like a problem, but the frog can breathe through its skin, which copes for this mixture of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, so it's fine. The rat has a mammal heart, same heart that we have, as a four-chambered heart. It essentially completely separates the deoxygenated from the oxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood flows from the right ventricle to get oxygen from the lung capillaries, which is then sent back to the left atrium and the left ventricle, which then disperses it to the upper and lower systemic capillaries, and then blah, blah, blah. Eventually, the deoxygenated blood gets back to the right atrium and the right ventricle, which is different from the frog's heart because we have four chambers and they have three.
Comparing the anatomy of the nervous system between rats and frogs. Both rats and frogs are invertebrates, which means they both have a brain connected to their spine, send out nerves that dictate their motor functions as well as their reactions to stimuli. The rat has 33 pairs of spinal nerves, which are the nerves that are in charge of sensing and reacting to stimuli, and they have 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which are the nerves responsible for sending signals between the brain, face, neck, and torso. These are also the nerves that help with taste, smell, hearing, sight, and touch senses, as well as spatial movement. The frog, on the other hand, only has 10 pairs of spinal nerves and 8 pairs of cranial nerves.
Frogs and rats move around very differently. The frog's skeletal and muscular structure is different from rats because of proportions. There is an emphasis on muscle mass in the hind legs of the frog, which allows it to jump very long and very high distances. But the legs are also positioned outward along to the side of the frog rather than directly under it, like the rat. This, in combination with the elongated metatarsals, is indicative of an aquatic animal. But also, it has super short arms, which means that most of its locomotive power is coming from its legs. But its fingers are also webbed, which is another thing that points to an aquatic animal. and they move very statically. They're not very precise with their movements. They have to jump. Whereas rats, that's where that big difference is the way that they move. Rats are purely terrestrial. They have claws and they have limbs that are directly under them, which means that they can walk and run on all fours the way that most mammals do. Well, maybe might not be able to jump very high like a frog. The claws and the muscular structure is designed in such a way that they can climb things and they can walk and run, and they are very well suited for a terrestrial habitat, while a frog is different. While the two organisms move very differently, they are also pretty similar anatomically. For example, they both share a femur, they both share a tibia and a fibula, they both share tarsals and metatarsals, they both share similar arm muscles and legs. And this is all evidence of common ancestor between the two organisms. So eventually, at some point, there was a split between I'm going to go on land and I'm going to kind of go on land in the case of the frog, and obviously the terrestrial rat.
This is a phylogenetic tree depicting the connection between the creatures of the kingdom Animalia. The very first split is at the root, differentiating the hagfish from the others who mutate and develop jaws. The most recent common trait between frogs and rats is the development of lungs and forelimbs. While the rat's ancestors go on to develop claws and nails, the frog does not. Moving right on the phylogenetic tree shows the rat's ancestors continue to mutate and develop fur and mammary glands, two things that would allow them to maintain homeostasis without the need for water, as well as provide for their offspring once they've been carried to term.
The last common ancestor between frogs and rats may have been influenced by the organism's desire to move away from water. There's evidence for this because frogs are very aquatic and rats are not. Frogs have webbed limbs and they also need water to reproduce. They are very well suited to living in the water, whereas rats, they have limbs directly under them. They have claws, anatomy that is very well suited to walking around and traversing on land. So essentially there is a pressure to be less and less dependent on water, whether that be access to new food or maybe the water was too dangerous. Either way, that desire to get from the water onto the land is what inevitably separated frogs from rats.
Research shows that frogs and rats are very different anatomically, despite sharing many similarities. The frog is an amphibian with webbed feet, and their thin skin allows them to absorb oxygen, so they live in wetlands. They also need to stay near water for reproduction purposes, since their eggs don't have a shell, so they need to be in water to stay hydrated. The frog's physical appearance, such as long, powerful legs and webbed feet, allow them to swim well and jump around on land. They eat the insects that live near or in the water, using a long double-lobed tongue to catch their prey. In contrast, rats are mammals, which means they carry their young to term and birth them, rather than releasing eggs. They are not confined to one specific area, and they do not have to be as close to water as frogs. Their diet consists mostly of vegetation, meaning they do not have a gallbladder since they do not need to digest as much protein. Rats also have several holes for exporting things from their body, an anus to remove waste, a urethra for urine, and a vagina for childbirth, or a penis for sperm. Frogs, on the other hand, only have one opening, a cloaca, that exports all waste, urine, and reproductive fluids. It's very likely that as animals move further and further inland, their most common ancestors split off, and that can explain why frogs depend so heavily on bodies of water, whereas rats developed not to be dependent on them.